Welcome back, my friends, to another episode of the Shema podcast. I have an amazing episode planned, an amazing guest I cannot wait to introduce you to. I do want to begin by dedicating this episode in the merit of my wife, Elisheva. Her birthday in the Gregorian calendar is this Friday, which is probably when I'll be releasing this episode. And for those of you who listened to that last episode and the challenges, as I talked about going through the honeymoon phase with Hashem, and then he sent me out into the wilderness and all these different challenges, you sort of saw a common theme that it was my wife, Elisheva, that was always keeping me on track. And that's one of the things I learned, really since Pesach was, it's sort of like when you're a parent, you have a young child. You don't realize how your child has grown until someone hasn't seen them in 3 or 4 months, comes and says, oh, they're so big now. It's like, oh, I didn't recognize that because I'm with them every day. And that's one of the things I really came to appreciate and learn more was just the level of my amazing wife's growth in her just deep emunah and bitachon, and that she knew what I was needing to learn, what Hashem was trying to teach me, which is live in the present. Hashem's telling me, I got the future. You don't need to worry about that. And that is something that she entirely helped me to learn as well. So, often when we're looking for spiritual growth, we look outside our home. We look for someone with a title rabbi. But the reality is, my friends, especially for us guys, that's why Hashem gives us a wife. They are our greatest rabbi. So in the merit of my wife, I want to do this podcast for her birthday, and may she be blessed with a husband, yours truly, that learns how to be a better husband for her and how to appreciate her for everything that she has done for me, in a recognition that I would be absolutely nothing and have accomplished nothing without her. So speaking of the fact that Hashem brings people into your life to teach you things when you need to learn them is why we have our guest today. Let me give you a little background before I bring him on. His name is Peter Himmelman, and he is a Grammy and Emmy-nominated rock and roll performer, singer-songwriter, film composer, author, entrepreneur, founder of Big Muse, which is a company that helps organizations like Boeing, 3M, McDonald's, Adobe, Gap unlock their creative potential. And he's now releasing a new book, Suspended by No String, which is a collection of essays and personal narrative and poetical reflections on spirituality, creativity, and his relationship with his Jewish faith. Because his number one title is that he is a Torah observant Jew, and he has much to teach us, and I can't wait to get in. And I know I try to keep my episodes into 1 hour. It's going to be so hard. If we can't do it, we're just going to have to persuade Peter to come back on the show again.
Welcome to the Shema podcast, the podcast for the perplexed, where Torah insights, intertwined through personal stories, as well as interviews with leading Torah scholars, demonstrate the empowering qualities of Torah and mitzvot. For more great Torah learning through Torch, the Torah Outreach Center of Houston, go to torchweb.org. Now to the show.
Welcome to the show, Peter.
Well, thank you very much, Dan. It's great to be here.
All right. So I have so much I want to talk to you about, but let's start in the beginning. If you would, just sort of talk about your early career as a musician and when you sort of got to that stage in your life, that time, and the why behind this reason that you started learning more about Judaism and Torah and adapting a Torah observant lifestyle, and if and how that may have influenced your career going forward.
I like that question. It's got a lot of space for me to jump around in. Well, I didn't ever think of it as a career when I was probably in 6th grade. And one of my early memories around that time, well, first of all, how seriously I took music. It was a serious thing. It's when you watch a kid playing, and if they're really into it, a kid is absorbed by what he or she is doing. And that becomes the basis, unbeknownst to them at the time. It becomes in some way, if you extrapolate it on, the basis of what they become. So I took my guitar and my amp that my dad had purchased from my cousin Doug for $125, and it was the greatest, thing I ever got, to my friend Andy's house. And Andy was a drummer. He was in 5th grade. I was in 6th. And he was really remarkably proficient. And we played together. We'd sort of jammed. I had a very rudimentary sort of grasp on the guitar music, but I had a great grasp on just making things happen. And when we played together for the first time, and I want to always rekindle that first time because it was something so intimate. That's the word that I use now, looking back. It was a kind of intimacy where it was almost uncomfortable. It was almost like, should we be doing this? And when I would play a note, he would respond and I would respond to him. It was like a sort of sublime conversation. And that really, I didn't really think of it quite like that at the time. I didn't have a vocabulary to express the details of what I was feeling. But I have a really, we have memories. Some of them are indelible. And I'm sure we've had literally trillions of experiences over the course of our lives, but there are very few that remain indelible, and that was one of them. So I just sort of did more of that, and I did more of that in different ways. I performed, I started, there's sort of a natural progression that anyone goes on when they find something that they love. In terms of, spirituality or faith in God, I don't see my understanding of God, which is no understanding at all, because how can you understand the ineffable nature of something, particularly of God? But I never think of myself as a sort of duality, that there's this secular part of me and then there's this, quote, religious part of me. Even as a young kid, I was aware that the world just couldn't have happened on its own. It just didn't seem right. Now, I grew up in a milieu, possibly you did as well. We had a conservative synagogue, and we were Jewish. My grandma spoke Yiddish. We had occasionally my mom would light Shabbos candles, which was no small detail. And as I've done a little research, sort of, I can't really call it research, just some sort of talking to my friends. The friends whose mothers regularly or even occasionally lit Shabbos candles are much closer to their Judaism than those whose parents or mother did not do that. It's a small thing. But that's to say that we had tons of Jewish things going on in our home. I never met anyone that kept Shabbos. I wasn't aware that was a real thing. I thought it was something that belonged to another era, like a Shalom Aleichem story or something. And if I were to have mentioned God in my home, it would have been, let's say, in a serious way, as a younger person, as a child, I'm sure they would have sought psychiatric help from me. And I don't know, it's not, with any disdain. It just was, you went to synagogue, you knew you were Jewish. We went to Israel a lot. But in this sort of piece of the culture, you didn't really hear anybody talk about God or emunah. You mentioned bitachon just in your introduction. It just wasn't part of life. So I kept that very cloistered. And I remember when I grew up later, I got a pair of tefillin. I was probably around 15 or 14. I put them on surreptitiously. In fact, in the bathroom, the same place in the basement. That was where my room was. And the same place I would blow my marijuana smoke out the window in the window well. I would be in the bathroom putting on tefillin because it was just too weird.
So did your parents know that you were wearing tefillin?
Not really. My dad, who we'll probably touch on in this interview, who died when I was quite young, he probably would have been into it. I somehow feel that my mom would have thought that was just a crazy thing. And it's hard to say. Look, I grew up the child of first generation Jews. So I didn't, even though there was a lot of anti-Semitism in Minneapolis where I grew up, I mean, it was often every couple of weeks I'd have to get into a fight. Hey, you effing Jew, and so on. And I, didn't mind fighting so much as that it mussed up my hair, and it was embarrassing in front of girls to like have snot coming out of my nose. But, I did my best. But it just wasn't the idea of and I'm just echoing what you were saying in your introduction, that I'm going to think about the present and God will take care of the future. Those kinds of thoughts, which are, they're sublime and yet they're very basic. They're very axiomatic to Jewish faith and belief. They were somehow missing. They were missing from everyone I knew. And my dad, and just jumping ahead, I mean, I had all sorts of things happen musically. I played in all sorts of different bands. I was really into, black music, and played with the soul star Alexander O'Neal, R&B star, whom, if any of your audience members know who he is, I'm like, I got to talk to that person. And I played with a calypso reggae band, and, I just did a lot of things. And my dad got a diagnosis of lymphoma when I was 17. And it was sort of the end of this kind of guileless, sort of the end of a phase of childhood. Things became very serious, and it just, everything was portentous. It felt very dire, the whole thing. And after he died, and there's a whole, obviously a whole bunch of details, which are part of my musical career in his death that we could touch on later. After he died, I moved with my rock band to New York. And it was there that I met Simon Jacobson, who was, I don't know if your audience members are familiar. Simon Jacobson wrote a very great bestseller called Toward a Meaningful Life. It was about the teachings of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And Simon and I became close right around the time I got all of a sudden, this record deal on Island Records. And I met the Rebbe. And I may be the fastest person to dive into, in quotes, and sardonic. My wife's like, no one gets your jokes. Sardonically, fastest one to jump into the cult. Like I put on tzitzis right away. I had a girlfriend that wasn't Jewish and whom I was really fond of. But all of a sudden, I just thought all my, let's say, my romantic activities, which are native to any fledgling rock star, I decided to just forestall them completely. And the next romantic activity I was involved in, I would be married before it ensued once again. It was a huge, fundamental, really quick change. I mean, I was in a very propitious place because my dad had died, he was very young. He had just turned 54 and I turned 24. And it's also due to the fact that my dad was a heroic figure to me. When people say, who was the person it's my dad, really. He was a United States Marine. He was strong and funny and self-effacing. And when you were with him, you felt like you could accomplish anything. He did that for so many people. That's a very rare human quality. Yeah. And I felt when I was with the Lubavitcher Rebbe, to varying degrees, that same thing. My first encounter with him, it wasn't like a political, I'm like in Chabad. I mean, everybody's sort of finds their own channel. That was the propitious, providential channel that I found. And meeting the Rebbe, it reminded me, in many factors, but about my dad. Like, here's a person that you see, and you feel like it's brought out some of my strengths and my humanity. A lot of people are just sort of parv. It's like, oh, Mel Bernstein, what's the weather? Just normal. There are a very, thank God, minimal subset of people who make you feel horrible. And we all know who those people are. But rarely are there those that you're around that are so inspiring that it's almost as if the curtains of the future open up and provide this hope for a person.
You mentioned that you're going all in very quickly through after just a limited time getting exposure to it. It sounds like that's what made the impression. You saw what Torah and everything can do to a person when you're sitting across from the Rebbe. And it sounded like you were like, well, I want to be more like that.
It was part of that for sure. The other thing was when I started to learn about certain things in Torah and Hasidut, it wasn't new for me in a certain way. The terminology was certainly new, but what was really interesting, especially as I reflect back on it, it felt so utterly familiar. It felt the way I used to feel when I was a kid and I would wonder about things. And as I mentioned before, I had no one to speak to about this. And it was surprising to me in some way that I found this instant familiarity and kinship with my own heritage. It wasn't so much that this new thing had fallen upon me, alighted upon me. It was simply that I felt as though I had gotten home finally in a certain way. The way that I see the world, that it's not random, that everything is part of this giant structure. And there are structures for me within the structure, things that I can't do and things I must do. It was very comforting in a way.
They say, it's in the Talmud, that when we're in utero, we know all of Torah. We have total clarity. And then we come into this world and Angel makes us forget everything. And that's why when we, I experience the same thing too. When you start to learn truth, it's almost like you're just remembering what you already knew. And that seems like what you're experiencing.
And somehow that truth, I mean, it's, in quotes, because who knows exactly what truth is. It's sort of it's a feeling. If I had to condense down, so what is the essence of my Jewish faith? What draws me to it? What in particular was familiar to me was that, let me give you a little vignette of Simon Jacobson, who was the oral scribe of the Rebbe's. Simon Jacobson is the person I'd referenced before. Okay. In his book, he's Rabbi Simon Jacobson. I've never called him Rabbi in my life, I don't think.
He's the one that would do his lectures every Shabbos and then...
Yes, exactly. So he was an oral scribe of the Rebbe. He had other people working with him. So just to quickly describe what that meant, he had an audio memory that he could remember things that were said in great detail. 5 or 6 hour long speech, which the Rebbe would generally give on Shabbos when you couldn't record because you can't use tape recorder on Shabbos. And people felt that what the Rebbe had to say was worth preserving. So there were these oral scribes, and they would listen to it, and they would remember, and they would sit around the synagogue in different places and listen, and they would be listening intently. Now, the dissertation that the Rebbe gave was not just some person rambling about some spiritual matters, which you see with some of these people from other sort of faiths. And, they just sort of ad-lib on these, riff on these subjects. But the Rebbe was speaking with precision, recalling pieces from the various compendium of Jewish thought and literature, the Talmud, the Mishnah, Kabbalah, Hasidus. He would speak in this spiraling, ascending spiral of complexity. And a lot of people would be falling asleep, literally. I would be there in 770, I was 24 years old, just watching this scene. It was amazing what was happening. It was in Yiddish. I hardly understood any of it, but it was beautiful to see. So on Saturday night, just give me a little background on who Simon is before I give you my vignette. On Saturday night, he and whatever his partners or, compatriots, they would unspool what was said on Shabbos. And it was like, like unbelievable, the mind unspooling what it had gathered and gleaned. And it just was unbelievable. I said to Simon, it's amazing that you can remember this much. And he's funny, Simon. He's very funny. He says, like, look, this is not, the memory is the least of it. What's difficult is finding the footnotes for everything the Rebbe said. And he goes over to this shelf, and he gets, every week he would have multiple correspondences via, hand delivered letters and so on. He was just next door to the Rebbe. And once Simon looks at it, he takes out this paper, and Simon had asked a question on the paper. I don't understand this section. And he circled it in red. And he goes, look, the Rebbe is very funny. He's a sharp wit. And he takes the Rebbe took his red, editor's pencil around the whole thing, and he wrote in Yiddish, what do you understand? Like, it's all wrong. Go back to the drawing board. So Simon is a very special guy, and I met him one night via a record producer friend of mine named Kenny Vance. He said, I know a lot of people in this town. I know Diane Keaton. I used to date her. I know Woody Allen. He's funny too. It's like name dropping, but in a funny way. He goes, but today I want to take you to my main connection, a religious Jew in Brooklyn, as though I wouldn't want to go, because I'm like a rock musician. I definitely wanted to go. We drove to Brooklyn. You ever have those times where that this is an auspicious night? Right. It's like, you just feel this is, okay, here comes another one. When you met your wife for the first time, or here it comes. I don't know how it's going to roll out, but there's something about it. And I meet Simon, and I'm like, he's, a bearded Jew. And he looked like he could get the joke. You ever heard the Yiddish expression, he hops? It's a beautiful one. You should use it. Hop. Hop means to grab. He grabs hold of the ideas. It's not like you have to explain it twice. And he was also very funny. I could see that he had a sardonic sensibility. I saw his wife, who was like, what's the deal? She's really, really pretty. And Simon, he doesn't look like he's going to be on the cover of Vogue magazine anytime. Like, what's the transaction here? I learned later it was scholarship was sexier than most anything. Right. So I'm just taking in the atmosphere, and we're talking, and Simon is talking, and this is the pivotal moment for me to dive into Judaism. I'm leading to it. It's only one sentence, so prepare yourself. And probably it has never struck anyone as powerfully as it struck me, because it was tailor-made for me. Everyone gets their own little. So Simon is talking, and I'm looking around the room, and Kenny Vance leaves. He was old at the time, so he was 40. I'm like, yeah, of course he's going to leave. He's old. And I say to Simon, now it's like 1 a.m, and it's 2 a.m, and I feel very relaxed around him. And I say, what's with all these pictures of the Rebbe on the wall? They look a little cultish to me. And Simon, he's just like, he's nonplussed, he's just not fazed by it. He goes, look, to me, he's like an inspirational grandfather. I get inspiration from him. Well, that makes sense. Then Simon starts to talk. He starts to talk about a tzaddik. So in colloquial Jewish terms, a lot of Jews hear the word, oh, Bert Blumenthal, what a tzaddik. He got me a deal on a car battery or something. But I fancied that Simon didn't mean that. And, that a tzaddik was something very special. And I also fancied that he was talking about the Rebbe when he said this. He said, look, a tzaddik could do anything. And I said to him, really? Can they fly? And he says to me, and here comes the pivotal statement. He goes, look, I've never seen anyone flying, but to a tzaddik, whether you're walking on the surface of the earth or flying 10, 20, 30, 40 feet above it, what's the difference? It's all the same miracle. I'm like, oh, damn. Yeah. Now that is what I've always thought of as a kid. everything's a miracle. And no one ever allowed me the space to think in that way. I said, is this what Judaism is about? He goes, basically, yes. It's finding the mystery and the wonder of every moment. I'm like, damn, I like this guy. I went out and bought a Tallis cotton the next day. I'm impetuous, so that's part of my nature. I don't expect, do not do this at home, you need parental supervision.
Every character trait and that are available can be used in a positive way or a negative way. So
absolutely true. I agree.
So you have this moment now, and you said you quickly sort of got very involved with, your Torah and the observance and all of those things. How did that impact?
I was the first signing at Island Records with this new president. His name was Lou Malia. And after about a month or so on the label, I told him they were looking at different tours for me to tour with Sting. And I said to him, look, I'm going to be keeping Shabbos. And he's Italian, and, he's been around a few Jews. He started laughing. He goes, what? Shabbos? What? Come on. He was laughing. I said, no, I'm serious about it. And he was a very unique person. Unfortunately, he passed away. He was so supportive of this thing with me because he saw, over a short period of time that it was real. We talked about it. And it made his job promoting me extremely difficult. That meant I couldn't go out on major tours because Friday night's a huge thing. And in the summer, so is Saturday night. So the impact on my career was, I guess, negative if you're counting beans. And I guess when you make decisions, I'm still touring, I still make records, I thank God made a great living, but it became much more difficult in a lot of ways. And I was just talking to my wife about this, after she'd seen a show of mine in L.A., and she said, yeah, you got off the road and you got off a major label. How does it make you feel? I said, to see that there's many fewer people in the venue than I used to have, it doesn't feel good. It's a price. It's a cost. But it's a cost that I would pay again and again and again. It also had to do with being a father. The first year I was touring, my son Isaac was born, I was on the road for 230 days. And it's just, when you're Jewish and you're sort of living within the guardrails of Jewish tradition and wisdom, you understand immediately that it isn't wise, if you can help it, to be on the road and become successful in that arena while your family suffers and your family life suffers. And the relationship that I have with my 4 kids now is tremendous. It's likely that I wouldn't have had that. To have a couple of platinum records on the wall, it's just not worth it. So you do, because you have a center point, because you have a touchstone, it's easy then to see, well, this goes here and that goes there. Music, which is incredibly important to me, and my music career is incredibly important, but it's not one. And they want you to be one. It's one. That's all you do. It's really, I guess, God, family, and music might best be 3. It's huge. Swimming, I love that, but that's 817. It's way down the list.
I was reading an article that you've also chosen many areas to be much more private, which is not conducive also to a career of a musician. I know I was reading for the audience doesn't know, you are, married to someone very famous, Bob Dylan's daughter, and that you had a lot of opportunities to promote that wedding, and both of you decided you didn't want that. And if you could speak a little bit about why sort of choosing to have a more private life was, important for you and your family.
You think that needs explication, huh? No, it needs none, really. It just sort of, here's a trajectory that doesn't make a lick of sense, and here's one that does. It's not, I understand a real choice is when you have two things that make a lot of sense. They're both pulling on you. You really are, they're equally weighted.
Right.
One idea, like sort of riding the coattails of another man, just in the least factor, never was appealing to me in any sense. And number two, fame it's generally a net negative. It is not a positive. Making a lot of money and having resources, which could be a result of fame, not always, is a positive. It's also a challenge. But fame itself,
There's a price tag.
I guess you could, there's a price, and the utility of it, you could make statements that might be positive and listened to more carefully. So there is that. Also, I respect the privacy of others. So, there's been all sorts of interviews when people want to know things, and it's like, it's not going to happen, right. Respect your parents also goes to your, in-laws as well.
So it really goes back to the idea that priorities and how you line those up, and what was more important than another thing that sort of guided you through your career path. Now, I'm curious to know, too, and it sounds like it definitely when I read about your upcoming book release, that your faith, Judaism, that influenced a lot, I would assume, in the type of creative output that you brought to the world in music and in writing. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. I mean, I guess to generalize, I think people write about or write songs about the things they feel strongly about. So the more I got sort of into let's say a more formal experience of Judaism, that became, more fulsome in my consciousness, you might say. And then I wrote about it more. But as I look back to some of the things I wrote when I was a teenager, they were also very spiritual. So it wasn't, and I guess I want to make this point, and for your listeners in a way, that who may be looking at Judaism or, thinking about it, it's not about changing who you are at all, at least the way I look at it. It's about bringing some essential piece of yourself to the fore. It's about unlocking the powers that you have within to make an effect in the world, which primarily, as you're talking about your wife, I completely agree. Everything that a man needs to learn, a lot of it is coming from the best teacher he could ever have, and the one that can actually say, no, that's stupid, or whatever it is that she might say, or that's amazing. And mold a man. I like to think of it as a man comes into a marriage, at least every man I've ever met, and myself totally included, as a rough, block of wood with the bark still on it. And the wife, if she is a good woman and if he is a good man, she'll plane that wood. And the planing is difficult. It's painful. It's the planing of a person's ego, and the man's ego, especially a man who is powerful in some way or successful. He's got a lot of husks that need to be removed. And, only over many years, I've been married, it'll be 36 years pretty soon. Only recently have I really started to say almost everything my wife has told me, all the things that I've resisted hearing, they're all true. And it was only my sort of fear of letting the information get inside me because it might affect a change or create some anxiety. She's pushing me to be a better version of myself. And that's where changing the world starts. It doesn't start with saving the polar ice caps. It starts with being a good husband, which is the best way to be a good father. I do think that there's a paucity of good fathers out there. And people are walking around hungry. So many people are hungry. I wasn't hungry. I got so much love from my dad and from my mom. And I never thought of it when I was a kid. Now I see it as unbelievable. Right. Talk about, the 1% or whatever these things are. And I see it as a responsibility to use whatever resources I have to help people. That's a big part of it. But hungry, I mean for love, for acknowledgement, for acceptance. It's a hungry world out there, and we're seeing the effects of it every day.
Right. Yes, for sure. And I've talked on the show a lot about, and with other people, when people say, look, all the problems in the world, the Jews cause them all, I say, yeah, you're right. It's up to us. We're the spiritual light in the world, and we need to be better. Like you said, I think you framed it perfectly. When you're a Jew and you begin to become observant and learn Torah, it doesn't change you. It lets who you really are out. And that's what the world needs right now, desperately. The entire world needs guidance and truth, and because everyone is really struggling. And this is our mission in the world.
Well, I see a lot of Jews after October 7th. We don't have to dive too deep into that, but it's so relevant. For me, all I can ever speak about with any veracity, and not even because who really knows their self, but is how I feel about something, But the way I feel about it, and I think it's somewhat universal among many people, Jews and non-Jews, October 7 was a turning point for the entire world. And certainly one of the bigger, at least societal, turning points I've ever experienced. And I know that I'm supercharged now with an incredible love for the Jewish people, which, by the way, does not preclude love for other people. There's another thing that's a little dangerous to talk about, but like Ahavas Yisrael, love for your fellow Jew. It sounds very, a little bit too insular, like why only the Jews? Here's how I explain it to non-Jews. I love my brother. His name is Paul. He's now the man that I have most respect for in the world. I'm serious, and the reasons for that. And I love him more than my best friends. And I have some beautiful best friends. And I love my best friends more than some sort of, good friends. And I love my sort of good friends more than acquaintances, and acquaintances more than strangers. But the hierarchy of love does not prevent me from loving the other, but in fact informs the way to love. It ennobles me and educates me in the way of love. And after October 7, my love, which it coexists alongside, and this is just a, honest, little bit here, my anger is so high, and I know it shouldn't be, but it is. I'm ready to fight at any moment. My cortisol levels are high, and they shouldn't be. But standing next to that, and in greater degree, is this incredible newfound sense of love for people and for God. And it's really changed so much in me. It's created this energy where I can work through the night. I can create things without having to be burdened by this anxiety, like, well, who cares what you have to say? And, who are you? And, all those things that we all have, no matter how much money we make, believe me, or how much fame we have, that's a human thing. But this love makes me better able to sweep it aside and say, yeah, that may be true. Who am I? Not much. You're not Springsteen. You're not famous or anything like that. I don't care. I'm going to do what I have to do with the time I have allotted because it's urgent right now. There's an urgency. And the Jewish part of me, which isn't a part of me, it's my essence, comes forward. It's not tangential. It's not compartmentalized. If you get into Judaism, what you'll find, it's not like, I'm happy, I'm so spiritual, nothing like that. I don't know that I'm happier. But I do know that the more I delve into Judaism, the more I touch something essential in me. And the more I touch that, the more courageous I am, the more daring I am in all ways in terms of how to love, how to create, how to help. And if it comes down to it, how to physically defend.
That's beautiful. I mean, the output, I believe, of knowing that there's a creator that's guiding everything and orchestrating everything, this idea of Emunah, having that level of trust removes really fears, all these unnecessary fears. And when the fears are gone, that's when one is naturally going to increase their love for everyone around them.
Yeah, I mean, the human being is, as we all know, is this composite, this duality. And Judaism speaks about it a lot, of sort of a spiritual nature and an animal nature. And we will constantly fight this animal nature, which is stronger because we're temporal beings in a physical world. And to have a Emunah, which means to feel that it's going to be good, it's hard. But bitachon, if you know the subtle difference, and actually it's a world of difference, bitachon isn't, it's going to be good. Bitachon means it is good right now. And it's and some things, like I miss my plane, okay, I could deal with that, but God forbid, there's some things that don't feel good right now. Yeah. But it takes an incredible intellectual will to guide your thinking towards this idea that there is a plan, there is a constant creator, that the world is being created at every second, recreated. Nothing is new. I have a quantum mechanical scientist friend from Russia who is, super religious, and we talk about this stuff. It's like, that's why you can do tshuva, because repent is a bad English translation, because the world is new at every second. Everything is changing, new all the time. God didn't make the world and sit back. It's a constant type of creation. And don't think anthropomorphically about this, like some guy in a cloud working with Play-Doh or something. I don't know how God does it, but, it's his secret.
Unbelievable. And I would like to talk about the book coming out, because just listening to you talk about everything, you have just a beautiful way of expressing some very deep concepts. And it sounds like that's what you sort of accomplished with your book that's coming out soon, Suspended by No String. Talk a little bit about that, and I would love to know what made you come up with that title.
Well, I had written a book that did pretty well in 2017. It was called Let Me Out, Unlock Your Creative Mind and Bring Your Ideas to Life. And it was sort of a book that had a utility. And the essence of it was, how is it that some people have an idea and make it manifest, and others that just goes down the drain with the shower water? Yeah. And it had case studies. It had a few things. There was a certain part of it, a modicum of it, that was sort of daring to be somewhat spiritual. And then I thought, well, I'm going to write another book about sort of the creative process. And I worked on that for 2 years, and it didn't feel right. And I brought it to this editor. Her name is Barbara Clark. She's amazing, like a serious editor. And she said, well, let me take a look at the manuscript. And she named for a fee, I'll write you a 15-page single-space treatise on what I see. She said, the writing seems great. You got a nice voice and the writerly voice, but you already wrote a book about creativity, and I see that this book is struggling to be a book about spirituality. And I'm like, that little sentence was so liberating, So I worked another 2 years on sort of a prescriptive nonfiction book about how to be more spiritual. And I basically finished the book, and while I was getting it prepared, writing proposals for it and going out to, a new agent and so on, I had written this piece. It was called Suspended by No String. It was about a 1,500, 2,000 word piece. And I wrote to Barbara, I said, before we close the door on this whole project, do you think we might shoehorn this one piece into the book? And I sent it to her, and 2 weeks went by, which is an inordinately long period of time for her not to have gotten back to me. And she did. She said, look, I have some challenging news for you. If you have more stuff like this, which may be the most beautiful thing I've read in years, I suggest you can the book you've been working on and start afresh. And that was another sort of freeing moment, because rather than have to, quote, teach somebody some sort of pedantic tome, I could simply write as though I were writing songs, which comes very natural to me. And that the book is a compendium of those pieces. I don't know if you ever have anyone read something on your show.
Please do. I would love that.
Let me see if I can conjure something up here. If not, we're just going to, just edit it all out. And you'll see, give a taste to this. So let's see what I got here. So the pieces they're varying, lengths and so on. Let's see. I'm going to read this piece. You sometimes feel as though you exist in a snow globe. Life is happening to you, but at one remove. You are touching it, but through the walls of a glass bubble. Voices sound like static instead of meaningful communication. And the things you see, whether during your waking hours or in your dreams, have lost their definite outlines. Exactly when this dullness of heart overtook you, you have no idea. Like many things, it happened without your noticing it and without your understanding it. Yet at some point you began to accept it as a kind of cosmic test, a test of your will and your faith. You wisely filed that experience under things I will never understand. And while that isn't the resolution you'd once wished for, it is surprisingly gratifying now. Being able to relax your hold on the mountain of things you once found too burdensome to carry is an unexpected pleasure. In fact, it's become a thing of no small beauty. Instead of circumscribing your sense of the world, letting go of your need to know has broadened it. You have given yourself permission to fully accept that divine intelligence is not for you or any mortal to comprehend. When you were a boy, your father explained to you that the people a painter creates with his brush have no more ability to comprehend the painter than you have to comprehend God. This, you think, makes sense in a way it never did when you were a child. In some ways, this book is a culmination of things I've been working on for about 15 years.
But you're describing so much of a vivid memory of something that really stuck with you.
Yeah, that's what we're talking about, those things that are indelible, some of the memories that are indelible, and sometimes, they're very sad, sometimes even tragic. And those are the kind that really stick around. But, I guess when you pray for a sense of sort of expanded consciousness, you might say, to use kind of a modern phrase. But the Hebrew phrase I like is godlut and katnut. Godless and cosness, that you have a large mind, gadol, or sometimes when you're angry or anxious, your mind becomes very myopic. It becomes very small. And when you are holding your child for the first time, you are, I would imagine, universally in a bit of this expanded godlut state of mind. And when you're watching CNN and looking at all the stuff that's going on, because they're feeding you that, like it's like a sewer pipe into your house, whatever channel you're watching, Fox or whatever it is, constant bad news, your mind gets smaller. Right. So when you pray, I was going to mention that you can also have these feelings, God forbid, from joy's opposite. They tend to expand your mind. But the prayer is that you will have this expanded consciousness. You will feel your essence, which I suppose is the essence of what an expanded consciousness is. You'll have less blockage with all this anxiety and who am I to do, whatever our fears are, and we all have them. You pray that you'll have those for purposes that are good. They will be revelations of good, not good. Also, I'm just going to harken back to the idea of bitachon, like this is good right now. But some things are very difficult to interpret as good right now. And you'll pray that you will see this good in a very revealed and easily detectable as good. Again, it's that idea that Simon Jacobson was talking about. There's no difference to a tzaddik who is in a godlut state of mind, whether you're walking or flying. It's all a miracle. I wrote a piece recently about how long it would take for us to get bored if we could actually fly. It was kind of a funny piece, but it was serious. Yeah. So these three guys took this, whatever it was, this sort of drug that literally allowed you to fly, and they sort of told you to bend your knees and just lift off. And it was so amazing. And they flew out over the coast. It was incredible. They were laughing and this. And then they said, let's go downtown, and flew around the buildings. And it was amazing. And then they went, let's go to the desert. And they flew to the desert. And all of a sudden, the main guy, I forget his name, was like, oh man, I should have taken some more suntan lotion. It's really hot. And the other guy said, yeah, it's super hot. Yeah, I'm hungry. Let's go circle back and have breakfast. And it would probably last about, I'm talking about oh my God, the miracle of it. It would probably last about 16 minutes max.
I totally agree. You're young, teenagers up and you were flying around with them. After a while, they'd be like, I'm bored. Where's my phone?
All of us would be. At some point, it's just like, but that's the problem that we're all wrestling with. To me, if we can, budge into the dangerous subject of Mashiach, the way that I view it, and nobody really knows what it is that whatever blocks us from seeing the miraculousness of, say, this coffee cup in front of me, or the fact that I can move my hands, those blockages will somehow be moved away. And in that sense of awe and wonder, no one will be jealous in that state, because you wouldn't be. When your child is born and you're holding the child for the first time, if that's affecting to you, you're not going to be angry at some minor slight that happened to you. You're going to feel this incredible feeling. My concern is, at least for me, why can't I feel that more often? And on a practical level, what can I do to feel that more? And in some way, my book is reflections on times when I sort of had an inkling of that feeling, of that wonderment, and also reflections on my frustration about not having it, and the difficulty of finding it, and the difficulty of living in this smallness of mind.
Well, I'm looking forward to reading it. I mean, I think that's great that you're able to do that. I've had these moments like Pesach. It's always over like Shabbos or Yom Tov when you can't write. But even I remember like Pesach, I had early that morning, I woke up early and it was an incredible experience. But I was thinking like, even if I could, I don't have the words to even articulate what I experienced. It's very hard to do that, at least for us lay people. So, I think just what you share with me already, I'm really looking forward to reading the book. And for the listeners, I will put a link where you can pre-order it now for its release in, I believe, August, correct?
I think it's like August 14th. That's when it's released. Pre-order is now. Pre-order is the name of the game in the publishing world. So I don't know when this thing is coming out.
It was a total joy talking with you, Peter. I have to have you on again because there's so much you've done with your creativity and you really have learned how to tap into your spirituality in a way, which is what we're all supposed to be doing, to be creative and bring out what makes us unique.
One more thing I just wanted to say about like creativity. The person who like strums a guitar or, you know, that makes a profession out of these kind of performative activities, that is just one type of creativity. Creativity is best expressed in how people love one another. That is the foremost means of creative expression. All these other things, writing a song or, you know, it's just sort of sideline stuff. I mean, what you do in your job is basically taking chaos and making something valuable out of it. It's extremely creative, no different than what any artist does, in my opinion.
My wife has a bachelor's and master's in music and sang for the Houston Grand Opera for over a decade.
Oh, man. Wow.
She comes into my office here and she goes, I have no idea what you're looking at, but I really like your color choices on your spreadsheet. So
it's how I would feel. But I mean, it's really the same. Look, anyone that's achieving anything is just using their capacity for creativity. We've as human beings in our culture ascribes creativity to certain people, artists and so on, bohemians, but it's just not the way. You know, I've met musicians and myself included in long stretches of time where I'm just repeating the same thing. And I'm not. Creativity is like being from. It's moment to moment.
And our spirituality is what brings out our creativity. And I agree. It gets expressed in many ways, and the most important way that we express ourselves is how we connect to other people. It was a total joy talking with you, Peter. I so appreciate your time, and maybe I can cajole you to come on the show again sometime in the future.
Yeah, I had a great time talking to you too. I really like meeting you on the phone, and this is even better.
All right. Thank you, Peter. Great to have you on. Could I lead out with like a clip of one of your songs too?
Oh, that would be great.
The mother offers warmth, the father shines his light. The wind whispers through the clouds, the falcons take to flight. The carpenter builds a home, the doctor kills the ill. The wolf howls out a love song, the soldier takes the hill. And I can't drag myself away from this. Can't drag myself away. Can't drag myself away. The penitent seeks forgiveness, the farmer prays for the seed, the teacher awakens memory, the angel blesses those in need. And I can't drag myself away from this. Can't drag myself away. Can't drag myself away. Not for a moment, not for a moment, not for the slightest division of time. The singer stirs the unbeliever, the grave digger shovels clay. The highway restores the spirit, the hand brushes tears away. And I can't drag myself away from this. Can't drag myself away. Can't drag myself away. Not for a moment, not for a moment. slightest division of time. The child absorbs universes, the victor of hymns of praise. The rock conveys its stillness, the dreamer longs for better days. The dead recall their lives, the hungry walk in despair. God calls all into being, the contented float on air. I can't drag myself away from this.